understanding that, well, if you're living in your head, that's only going to get you so far. But it is okay to kind of explore that heart space more, especially if you're a leader, and unfortunately a lot of the time, especially if you're a man.
I made a reasonable amount of money fairly early in my life, but it didn't really satisfy me. I had a nice house and family and beautiful princess and a business which was generating a lot of money, but it didn't really satisfy me. There had to be more. There had to be meaning. This couldn't be the meaning. There had to be more.
This is Humble Mind. We're a social learning community of curious professionals who share a passion for connection, conversation, and learning about the future. If you're listening to this podcast, you're missing out. Humble Mind community members get access to join our recordings live, like John, Rana, and Claire here today. They get access to early releases of new clips on our platform, our weekly newsletter, access to group sessions, our pods, workshops, replays from previous sessions. It's all good stuff. So check out join.humblemind.co today for more. Somebody once told me that our perception of reality is filtered by our personal mythology. Yes. We are, after all, a collection of stories, our beliefs, our thoughts and memories, and they're all stored somewhere deep over here on our hard drive. But how accessible is that hard drive? Do we even have access to it in the first place? How much do we truly understand about the subconscious and how it works, or even at least know it in some more detail? Can we really rethink and reshape our lives and where we think we're headed? What kind of roles do our stories play in helping us to craft the future version of ourselves and ultimately help us to break the spell? Well, today I'm really, really happy to have a conversation with someone I really admire on this particular topic. His name is Michael Boyle. He is, among many things, a psychotherapist. He's an author. He's also the founder of ABandOfBrothers and Mankind Project, and a whole host of other projects and incredible things that he's done during the course of his life, which I'm sure he'll share a little bit about today. And he's going to help us today explore exactly these kinds of questions, how our unexamined beliefs shape our reality, and how maybe we can get the better of these things as well. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Good to see you, Alex. Yeah.
Wonderful. So maybe just as a quick kind of context setting before we dive into the real meat of it, like you're also, a Jungian psychotherapist. You've done amazing work with some charities all over the world. You're a facilitator, you're a writer. What drew you into kind of doing this at first rather than, let's say, becoming a banker or a bricklayer?
Well, I was a kind of money junkie for the first part of my life, really. I had a business and the idea was to just get more and more and more and more. And I became gradually disillusioned with that and realizing that I didn't want to spend my life just being in the whole money world, because it was quite a dog-eat-dog thing. And I started doing some really silly things with money, and like spending money ridiculously. And in the end, actually even setting fire to some of it at business meetings. And I was told that wasn't a very wise thing to do, which that drove me to therapy, actually. And there's a bit of a story about that, if you want that story.
Sure.
My thing was cars, to keep going cars with the money. And this particular day, I drove out to this therapist. I had no idea what I was going for, what therapy was, but I drove my 635 BMW CSI out to my therapist's house, parked it right outside his house, and went inside and started talking to this nice old fella. And then he said to me, "Why are you looking out the window? You keep glancing out the window." And I said, "Well, I'm just looking at my car." And he said, "Don't worry, it's a safe area." And I said, "Well, I'm only looking at it because I haven't had it very long and I like looking at it." So he got me to take my chair and put it right up to my nose is right on the glass, and I'm looking out on the street. And he said, "Well, what are you looking at? Tell me what you're looking at." So I started to tell him about the metal flake paint and the white ball tires. And he said, No. What are you really looking at? What is this in the road? So then we got pretty soon, it was my ego trip. And then it was sometimes to my horse that I rode through the world on, and it was an extension of myself. And eventually we got down and down and down. What are you really looking at? And we got down to the bottom, and it was a consolation prize for being involved in something which my soul was not interested in. Mm. And that was a very different drive home from that than the drive there. It changed my life in many ways. It's, I suddenly, I couldn't argue with that. I somehow, it cracked straight through my ego because suddenly I had to realize that I had a soul, and I wasn't paying attention to it. And he could see it straight away. So thank you for that. But now what do I do? That was yeah. Mm.
Wow. Yeah. So from that, was it a fairly kind of quick sort of path into doing something else, or did you still wrestle with that internally for a few years?
Well, it took a while, obviously, to sort of escape from all the ties that I'd created around money and all the people that I was employing and all the rest of it. I started to do a therapy course, and at that time, of course, it was a very feminine environment, the whole psychotherapy idea. And it wasn't long that before my group, I had there were 15 people in my long-term group, and I was the only man. So I just had to get used to that. It was quite it was interesting, but sometimes it was a bit of an ordeal. And then I was at my local bookshop, and the woman knew me quite well. And she I walked in one day, and she just marched up to me with a copy of Iron John by Robert Bly, and said, "I think you need to read this." So thank you. So I bought it and read it. The next thing I know,
is that a novel? Sorry.
No, Iron John was a reference to a Grimm Brothers myth.
Okay.
And Robert had built a book around that, talking about men. And I read it, and I was just taken with it. Although it's not an easy read. But and then I heard that he was coming to England, so I made an appointment. I went along to a gathering with 150 men, and there was a very different feel to the psychotherapy group. Of course, yeah. The feeling was, someone's going to get killed around here. It could be me. So very strange assortment of men, all type sizes and backgrounds. But Robert and other teachers, James Hillman, Michael Mead, Malidoma, all came along to these gatherings, all presented themselves at these gatherings. And I really learned a lot from that, because I learned about my own self. I learned about the soul. I learned about poetry, the language of the soul. And I learned about men, and in men in particularly, they talked about initiation. So the initiation was something that happened right across the world, back through time with our indigenous ancestors, and it was the movement, the ritual transition from boy to man, which was absolutely necessary for the survival of those indigenous tribes. They needed warriors to protect protect themselves. They needed skillful hunters, and what they did not need is men who would keep regressing to the comfort and the security of the mother. So they set up, and the elders of the tribe understood this, and they set up rituals, and the mothers of the women as well, of course, were involved, so that the boys would be able to move into the world of the mythology of the tribe, and they would be able to align themselves with the protection and the providence of the tribe. So yeah, those were really interesting studies, and of course, depending on the nature of the tribe and what it needed and its geographical location, all those rituals varied a lot. But the theme was there, that it moved from the mother to the dependence, to the independence, to the truth of interdependence, both on each other and with the wider environment and the mother nature, if you like. They moved from the mother to the great mother, if you like. Those were interesting studies. And I began to realize, well, I wish I'd had that. I'd so wished I'd had someone guiding me in that wise way. And that was what led me into the men's work, really. Yeah.
And we'll get into a little bit more, mention a bit more about some of the men's work you've done before, but just, really interesting to sort of dive into a bit more the kind of the psychology of those initiation rites, and and that kind of rite of passage, right? The shifting from being a child essentially to a young man or a young woman. I know that women have initiation rites of their own as well, but I suppose specifically in the context of men and why initiation is such a good idea, especially for, us today in our culture where we have so little of those traditions and those kinds of things that we're passing down. What would you say is the impact of this on, let's say, young men who are not getting access to those sorts of rights, who are not getting the ability to know about them, know who they are?
Well, we live in a society which is kind of stalled at adolescence, really. Nobody knows when they're really grown up. I mean, it's a difficult question. So the impact is, I think the wise elders of the past must have known that the impact on the young man without initiation, he is going to imagine that that what he needs is power, and what he needs is more to accumulate more possessions, and it would be all about the ego, really. So in a way, you could say at one level that the initiations were an ego death, or an ego adjustment in that sense. We don't have it now, and we've got a bigger problem now because we've got family breakups. Even the fathers aren't in the house. The common denominator in prisons is, very clearly no adult role model, no positive role model or father in the house to guide. And so the situation now is probably worse than it was then, because at least they had community and they could, take care of each other. Now we've got even the nuclear family has been broken up, and young men are finding themselves lost, really. And they're being told or being inculcated with this idea that they're a problem. They're a problem, and the solution is punishment. And of course, the problem is the society. It's not the individual kids, really. And that's something that kind of struck me early on with learning about initiation. That's one of the reasons I got involved into the men's work, because I wanted to be initiated myself. I wanted to experience that. And what I discovered in that was very fruitful. And eventually that's where we began the idea of a band of brothers, that we would work to, which the charity does. It recruits and trains local adult men to serve as mentors for these young men who haven't had much access to adult males. Yeah.
A lot of the work that you do is around sort of like looking at stories, and the stories we carry around with us, right? Whether they're inherited, whether they're made up completely, or whether they're the root of some kind of deeper subconscious creation as well, or perhaps all three. Talk to me a little bit about your, kind of maybe your own interest in stories and mythologies, but also perhaps also the kind of the background as to why, or the what psychotherapy, what Jung might have said, because I know he's kind of the father of a lot of this thought.
Yeah.
And even in your LinkedIn profile, you call yourself a Jungian psychotherapist, so it's all there. Tell me a little bit about the history there of that.
Yeah, so it's Jungian centered, really. He's my main mast, if you like. Tell me a little bit about that. Well, it's the story, the myths are really, it comes from the Gnostic tradition. And Jung himself said that the Gnostics were the first psychologists. They didn't have a canon or a book which you had a lot of rules by to live by. People found their own experience through myth. And a myth can be interpreted in numbers, any number of ways. It's a very individual process, But long before we ever had a printing press or even the written word or alphabet, the telling of stories was a means by which wisdom and experience has passed on through generations, really. So meaningful lessons were captured in stories, and that's true pretty much all over the world and back through time. I mean, part of the initiation process was for the young men was to learn the tribe stories, to understand the mythology of the tribe, the gods and all of the influences that they attach themselves to. So, as human beings, really, we're kind of story-based creatures. If we don't have a narrative for something, it becomes largely inaccessible or invisible to us, and it's easily forgotten. And so what I like to think about is that we're all heroes in our own story. We're all the leading actors in our own story. And we make up epic narratives to communicate our self-understanding and to create a structure of meaning for ourselves in our own lives. Joseph Campbell, who was a great collector and writer on myth, probably the greatest ever, he used to say that a myth is something that never was, but always is. So myths bring meaning, to the moment. They're not necessarily true, but And the other thing I love that he said is that myth is more important than history, because that's just produced by journalists, and we know how reliable they are. Yeah. Myth brings meaning, and we are mythical creatures. Hopefully we're living meaningful lives, or lives that we look for meaning to or want to create. So myths are really important, really. People live within myth without really knowing it, I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I've been doing a bit of a deep dive the last few weeks, just reading books and listening to audiobooks on a lot of kind of some of the founding Greek myths. And just so interesting how they're not at all like how you might think, let's just say the gods, the Olympic gods, for example. They don't behave like gods at all. They're just a bunch of kids. They're jealous. The one is screwing the other one's wife. They're having kids on the side. They're kind of lying to each other. There's jealousy. There's envy. There's all sorts of crazy, very human-like characteristics. Which is interesting. It's such a reflection about us. And but at the same time, they do seem to carry these stories which are seemingly simple or everyday, but they do. There's a kernel in the middle of it, which seems to last through the ages as well. Is there a distinction you make between a mythology and a story, or a kind of any useful way of thinking? When
I suppose a myth or mythology is a story that contains meaning, and I suspect there are lots of meaningless stories. Where it comes, I'll talk a bit later, Minu, about how it gets personal. But I worked a long time, as you may know, with Shakespeare, and the idea that he was the greatest psychologist there ever was before that profession was ever even thought about. And he understood and portrayed, particularly leadership at the highest level, and had a superb insight into human nature, both at the highest level and the lowest level. He understood the man in the street and the mob, but he had an insight into Julius Caesar and Prospero and Richard III, Macbeth, Henry V, all of these central figures. They were psychological profiles that had a huge impact. And of course, we recognize them. We sit in front of the plays and we're reminded of the human nature, of the human psychological nature, and how it's acted out in big egos and big positions and areas of huge responsibility. And we see ourselves related in those. So we meet the story with our own story, in a sense. That's the whole idea of what they call the mythopoetic tradition. What would I have done, So I suppose reframing our experience through a story allows us to pull together threads of meaning in our personal lives and within a common experience of the culture that we're in.
And so how can we? Is there a sort of a kind of a story application for dummies kind of guide that maybe you can give us, or a couple of steps to start thinking about that? Like if we were thinking about our own story and some of the things that we want to understand or adapt or rethink or reshape. For example, if I'm feeling depressed, or if I'm just not happy with where I am in my life, what are some useful ways of sort of changing the perspective on that? Because it might still be the same story, and the same person living the life, but I want to feel differently. How can these sorts of things you were talking about help us to see that differently?
Well, if I was working with you on a one-to-one practice, I would ask about the stories that you're drawn to. What is it what are the heroes and who are the characters in those stories that actually capture your imagination? Because there's never a coincidence around that. What we want to know really is what are the stories that you're telling yourself? So people identify with Robin Hood or Joan of Arc or whatever that is. But we uncover the unconscious through, you mentioned in your introduction, how do we get onto the conclusions and the programs that are on the hard drive?
Yeah.
Well, they're all in the form of stories. And those stories are all the ones that we have, that we've lived through. We put them on there through experience, or what we believed, or what we bought into. So my work is to help the client become more familiar with the stories that they're telling themselves, which they're not aware of. So I call it our personal mythology. And our personal mythology, some people would call it belief systems, but belief systems is far too rudimentary a term. It's the conclusions, the definitions, the assumptions, the experiences, the hard-earned wisdom, all those things combined accumulate in the subconscious mind. And our work is to the subconscious mind, which is basically the body mind. And our work is to find out what's there. What is the story you're telling yourself? How does it serve you? Is it true? What is the behavior that generates, and the thoughts that generates that story? And is it a healthy one for you? Is it aligned with your highest version of yourself? Or does it actually diminish you in some way? So we would do that. We would find a story. We'd get the punchline from the story. Let's think of something which is a negative. Let me think. The most popular personal myth is I'm not good enough. That's probably the most unpopular one. So that's the conclusion of the story that you're telling yourself. So I asked someone to say that out loud, and so that it's not ringing around your head. It's expressed. And when it's expressed, you can hear it. It rings in the air, and then we can say, well, what does that do what thoughts come when you speak that in the air, and how does it feel? And then you'll immediately see in the self that either one or two things happen. Either it's resonant as true, in which case you get a little taller, the eyes come up a little bit, the chin moves up, and they're slightly inflated. Which is a healthy sign. Or more often than not, very much more often than not, it's a diminishing story. It's the eyes hit the floor. There's a what we call a dissonance, and the thought is not an uplifting thought. So we're teaching people to recognize diminishing thoughts, i.e., stories. That we receive either from the field or from our culture, test them in our bodies and learn to trust our feeling feedback mechanism as to whether to buy them into it or not. And of course, where the response is diminishing, it's a story that doesn't serve us anymore, although it may have at the time, because the subconscious mind, or the hard drive, if you like, its main program is survival. survival at all costs. And survival usually means caution, be careful, and all sorts of fear-based stuff that maybe kept you alive at the time, but doesn't serve you anymore. So in this way, I hope to help people to orient themselves from within and learn to live from the inside out. So they're testing their own assumptions as they go along.
Beautiful.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned something just now about you linked, I might be paraphrasing, but you linked the idea of the unconscious mind to I think you said the body mind.
Body mind, yeah.
The body mind. That's curious. And I think for a lot of people, that's new information. That's a new way to think about, how the body is part of the expression and part of essentially the emotional response that's stored in there. Maybe you can just talk a bit more about how
the body is where the body is a storehouse. It's a story house. It's where our stories are kept, and most of us, of course, live in our from the neck up. We're all marvelous in our academic views and opinions, but the subconscious mind, as I understand it, is an accumulation of experiences. We learn from experiences, so it's a very much now the subconscious mind. It doesn't speak English. In fact, it's not language based at all. It deals with experiences. So it's no good just having a mantra that you can repeat over and over, because that doesn't work. The subconscious mind it signals itself through feelings in the body. So as I say, what I do is ask the people to say the storyline or the punchline or the thing that they really believe to be true out loud, and then they'll get a physical reaction. Something will happen in the body. There'll be a sensation. Often, if it's a negative, if it's dissonance, it'll be an unconscious. It'll be an uncomfortable sensation. And we know that 95%, the research says that 95% of our thoughts are from the subconscious mind. And that's a hell of a lot, which means that only 5% of the time we're actually consciously thinking. So this is quite important. So the subconscious mind has no verbal language and it has no imagination. It takes everything literally. But it's a feeling mind, but it's 1,000,000 times more powerful than the conscious mind. Subconscious mind was first brought into the light, if you like, by Freud. He believed that the subconscious mind was just a kind of primitive reflex brain, if you like. But modern psychology, modern hypnotherapy in particular, has come to realize that the subconscious mind is our controlling intelligence. Yeah, it's in charge of all the physical body systems. It communicates with every cell in the body at all times, and it can directly affect our health. And we know that how placebos work. If you take a placebo, suddenly you feel better, and what's happened? You just get a sugar pill. But suddenly the subconscious mind bought it, so it's okay now. So I call it the hard drive, and the stories that we bought into are the programs that are installed on the hard drive. And the subconscious mind has been guiding and developing our body from its embryonic state, really. Every thought, every emotion, every desire, every internal representation of life is monitored and overheard by the subconscious mind. It's as if the subconscious mind is how the body responds to the external factors in our lives. And the moment we change our perception is the moment we alter the chemistry in our bodies. Because if I go into fear, for instance, immediately I have a fearful thought, something bad's going to happen. There's a flood of chemicals that come into my body. So so there's a whole chemistry that's attached to the thinking process, the feeling process. And at that point, when that happens, the interesting thing is that, and maybe I'll come back to it later, but the most important thing there for us is going forward and to heal is that when we are in a dissonance, the imagination closes down. Well, it doesn't actually close down. The imagination of the mind goes back to memory. It goes back to the past. It filters out. It goes back and finds one of those experiences in the past experiences which held that same emotional emotion and brings it into the future, brings it into the present. Pardon me. So the past, in that sense, is always running the show. You know, we're never really present while the subconscious mind is having its way. It holds all the repressed memories and shadow aspects of ourselves, and unfortunately, those memories and aspects of ourselves are not processed. If those memories are not processed and integrated into our lives, which is what therapy does basically, they remain locked in the confines of the body, and they express themselves as tensions or even symptoms.
Yeah. And the kinds of things that to us in our everyday, kind of higher level state probably feel and seem inexplicable. Why am I feeling this way? Or why is this coming up for me right now? I'm supposed to be happy. I'm supposed to be feeling fulfilled, that's where that dissonance comes from, right? Dissonance, almost like a musical term. It's something that's not harmonizing. It's not in alignment. It's not sort of fitting together, really. That's
what all therapy is attempting to do, really. In my sense, I like to make things concise. It's to reprogram the subconscious mind.
You talk a bit about, maybe another way to also put it is the fact that you talk about breaking the spell, right? This spell that we're under.
Spells.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that and why specifically you use the word a spell.
Well, a spell is something that's we as far as the fairy tales tell us, the spell is something that, a delusion that we're under, that we're totally unconscious of. We don't know we're under a spell. How does it work? Up to the age of about 7, we are completely we're at a point of we are absorbent. We're like sponges up to that point. But we need to survive. And in order to survive, we need to fit in. And in order to fit in, we need to do as we're told, be a good boy, be a good girl, all that sort of stuff. And we draw conclusions from our experiences around big people who got it before we did. So I suppose the most influential spells are the ones that we tell ourselves in response to the very personal messages that we took on from significant others at a time when we were wide open and very impressionable. A casual remark to a child can be devastating. I've come across that many times working with adults, that somebody once said to them, you'll never amount to anything, or something like that. Or I remember a woman I worked with, she overheard her mother say to her friend, "I never really wanted children."
Oof.
Whoa. That was and it took her a while to realize that she'd kept that, and she'd kept it so tight and deep in her body that she didn't realize how much that was impacting her self-worth.
Well, that goes back to the story, right? We hear something like that, which might have a different intention completely, but it then becomes kind of subsumed into what
we elaborated as well. Yeah, my mother didn't want children, and it may have been that the fact that her mother may have said after that she didn't hear, "Oh, but I was pregnant and it was such a joyful thing, and I'm so glad I've had the baby." But she didn't hear that bit. She heard so the conclusion and the elaboration on it was, "I wasn't wanted. I'm not worth anything." The whole downward spiral.
You mentioned earlier that you work with leaders. And professionals, and also with your work with Olivier, Mythodrama, your work with Richard, who's been on this podcast as well. What are the kinds of things that you often find with leaders, and also knowing you, I know that you've worked with a lot of different leaders and very senior leaders as well. Have there been certain things that have surprised you, or perhaps maybe not at all surprised you, in the kinds of things that occupy their attention and why?
Well, you probably know how popular the whole imposter syndrome is, So, I've actually worked with a team of 7, a leadership team of 7. And I've had I've worked with them in a group, and I've had them one-to-ones in a very confidential space. Then all of them, all 7, virtually said that they had this imposter syndrome thing. They didn't know what they were doing there really, and they were waiting to be found out. Now, can you imagine the 7 of them sitting around a table all thinking that? But yes, so the imposter syndrome is very, very popular. Or, when you're in leadership, it's a bit of a performance, really. It is a performance. People are looking at you, and you've got to kind of get the right energy and direct people. And sometimes you've got to be forceful, and sometimes you've got to be sensitive and listening. And so there's a whole array of qualities that leaders need that I've never come across a human being that has them all. And so we have to learn what we might overdo, and learn what we don't know. Yeah. So leadership is a great arena for working with people in the whole personal development, forward thinking, growth, if you like, development area. Yeah.
Yeah.
It impacts a lot of other people, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose the biggest step in that is also learning how to just lead yourself, right?
Yeah.
And understand yourself. Are there any, you mentioned, and I know that you've worked a lot with, source material from Shakespeare. Are there any particular leaders, whether they're bad or good, that kind of appear, in the plays from Shakespeare that you often come back to, or that you reflect on? I can think of a lot of poor leadership examples.
Yeah, there aren't many good ones.
Yeah.
So the most popular leader that we used to get asked for all the time was Henry V. Because Henry V turns out to be it was one of Shakespeare's last history plays. I think he'd been through all the Richard III's and and Richard II's, all of these people, and so suddenly you've got this man who's willing to adapt. He leads the few to the victory against the many. The few with those with few resources come out on top. So everybody a lot of people in the corporate world consider themselves under-resourced. So they definitely want to know how that one ends, and what he does. What he does is he's open. He says he hears the troops accuse him of being in it for the money, that when our throats are cut, he'll ransom himself and we'll be none the wiser. But then he has to come out and tell him, I am not covetous for gold. He earns me not if men my garments wear, nor care I who doth feed upon my cost. He says, I'm not in this for the money. But if it be a sin to covet honor, then I am the most offending soul alive. So at least Shakespeare creates this character which is beyond all the normal stuff that you get, and it's something to aspire to. And so that's Mythodrama's bestseller, really, that we call Inspirational Leadership with Henry V. There's a lot I could say about Henry V, and there's a lot I wouldn't say performed. I led seminars around Henry V, deep seminars on Henry V for 2 and 3, 4, 5 days, many times, and I learned a lot from that character myself. Yeah.
What did you pick up from it for yourself? Was there any gold in it personally?
Well, the most important thing that was the whole idea of being in the heart rather than the head, which is, Henry basically says to them at the end, we've got there were 40. The numbers vary according to who you listen to, but some people say 40,000. We're surrounded by 40,000 on horse, freshmen, on fresh horses. And we've got about 4,000, 5,000. And how are we going to do this? And he tells them very seriously that, that in our hearts, we're in our hearts. If we stay in our hearts, we can beat them, And later on, I was working around this whole idea of the heart with a group called the Heart Math Institute. I don't know if you've heard of them. Yeah.
No.
And they've been looking at the idea of this pump that we've got under here. That it's not just a pump; it's an amazing electromagnetic generator. In fact, it's the most influential organ in our bodies, more than our brains. It has neurons in it. Now, they discovered all this, and one of the latest discoveries that I learned about was that they somehow researched and found that people who are connected in their hearts, in other words, this is the organ that connects us. This is the organ that connects us. People say, hey, my heart goes out to you. We touch hearts. When we're consciously in our hearts with each other, we can feel connected. And this jelly thing between our ears, is one marvelous as it is, it actually separates us with all our opinions and our knowledge and our judgments, etc. And they found out that relatively few people who are connected in their hearts can generate more electromagnetic power, far more than a multitude of people who are self-interested, interested in it themselves. And I think that could be a quite significant piece of research. And I liked it anyway. It's when we think about forming communities and becoming less selfish, etc. That's Heart Math Institute. That's pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, so that was what I got from Henry more than anything else. Really, the whole idea of being in your heart. Yeah,
It's interesting because when you think about not only a kind of a common behavior amongst leaders, but I would say maybe all men. Going back to men,
Yeah.
There really is a difficulty in kind of connecting with this heart, whether it's cultural conditioning, social conditioning of some kind. If I'm too much in my heart, I'm kind of dancing too close to, being soft or being too feminine or whatever the story is that I think a lot of people can kind of understand, sort of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And is there any kind of good advice on rethinking that, on sort of, putting the shields down and understanding that, well, if you're living in your head, that's only going to get you so far, but it is okay to kind of explore that heart space more, especially if you're a leader, and unfortunately a lot of the time, especially if you're a man as well.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly not a rethinking. It's a willingness to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, I guess. And of course, there's a lot of anxiety around being vulnerable, particularly for men around other men, because you never quite know if you're safe or not, or you probably assume you're not. Back to the hard drive again, and the key program is survival. So I've got to watch out for other men. I can't really trust them, and I've got to watch my back. But once we're into a connection in our hearts, then we can collaborate much better, and we trust much more. It's just a very short trip of moving our consciousness from our brains into our bodies, into our hearts. But this is very much the movement in the men's work, I would say. If you had to summarize it all, that's basically it. We've had generations, thousands of generations of being out there, doing killing the beasts, fighting the wars, doing all that stuff that's action orientated, on our own, out on being individual heroic path, and it's only now with the men's movement, which is bringing men together, emotionally connected, and working together towards common purpose. That's not really something which has been, which is easily traceable in history. It's not something. There's no war involved. There's no enemy, other than the enemy is within my own shadow. I work with my own shadow, and I work my own path. So the inner, it's we call it beyond the hero. The hero story is obviously the most popular men's story, out there fighting the good fight, winning the princess and getting the castle and all that. But that's really where I could say with my career, I made reasonable amount of money fairly early in my life, but it didn't really satisfy me. I had a nice house and family and beautiful princess and a business which was generating a lot of money, but it didn't really satisfy me. There had to be more. There had to be meaning. This couldn't be the meaning. There had to be more. So that's the spirit with which a lot of men arrive with the men's work, trying to find themselves, trying to find their confidence. And a lot of that is, of course, what we've inherited from our fathers and our fathers and way back through the generations. Yeah.
And yeah, beautifully said. And maybe just to be fair to, you know, the other gender as well, if we're looking at that being the leading edge of some of the men's work right now, moving from the head to the heart.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of amazing women's work that takes place as well.
Definitely.
What would you say is there the kind of the sculpture being refined? What is the work to be done there on that side? You know,
on which side?
I realize I'm a man asking another man this, but I'd love to hear from Rana in a moment, who's who's with us too. But just in your perspective, when it comes to this kind of heart work, what's the deal for looking at it from a woman's perspective and the woman's work?
Well, as far as my experience goes, when men finally drop into their hearts, the women in their lives and their families actually reap the benefit. You know, that's one of the reasons I keep doing the work, because it has ripples. When the men do their work, they're more self-aware, they're more considerate, more sensitive, perhaps, and you know, in fact, we can probably meet women more about whether I don't want to generalize, but where women naturally are. I think, I hate to generalize, but I believe that women are more in touch with their emotions and more in touch with their bodies, and that's the biology of it, perhaps. And men can actually get closer men and women can get closer together if a man puts down the sword and the shield and opens up to being a bit more vulnerable. Yeah. And that's a very scary thing for a man to do, but I should always add. Yeah.
Do you think there is a sort of an evolutionary programming of some kind, maybe going back to, you know, our days, sort of singing about with trees and, you know, eating fruit that fell off the, you know, onto the forest floor? You know, is it sort of some kind of programming that set us apart in the way that we held ourselves, the way that we built communities, that we could, you know, like you said earlier, be good hunters and all that? Is there a sort of like you said, a biological kind of drive to this, which regulates the head and heart relationship that we've got to somehow overcome?
Yeah, maybe that's a good thought, actually. Yeah, definitely. In part of the initiation process for men is to really connect with the environment and be in touch with nature, Mother Nature, and respect for nature. And I think a lot of the initiation programs were that. It was as I mentioned before, it was an interdependence. They understood the interdependence. The Native Americans were particularly, we know more about them than most other indigenous people that were long gone. But we know that the Native Americans were great lovers of nature and felt that connection intuitively. You know, they didn't have to be taught that; they just knew it. You know. Yeah.
Is there something you can? I'm thinking about, you know, some really good friends I've had all my life, who I grew up with and who I, you know, saw become men, become people, women as well, you know, adults from kids. You know, you sort of watch each other grow up, and you then understand that person as an adult versus, you know, how they might have been when you were all kids. And I can kind of picture myself having a conversation with some of them right now, asking them, go and listen to this podcast and perhaps a few other things that I might recommend to them, and immediately kind of get, maybe they're nice about it at first, but ultimately there's a stonewalling where they're going to be like, I'm not going to really do that. You know, I'm not going to go far. You talk about sort of head and heart and you know, at some stage it just sounds like kumbaya to them, right? And it's something that's going to be dismissed. Is there something that I can say, or that someone like that can hear from you, which will allow them to kind of just maybe drop that and take another look? Not that you have to convince someone, but rather, like, you know, is there a different way to see it, especially when there's so much cynicism in the world? There's so much kind of like resistance to the willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to kind of inspect a little further than we've all become accustomed to. What would you say to someone like that?
Well, that's a thought that I had when we were starting A Band of Brothers, because there is a great difference between a man at age 19, 20, 21, and a man at the age of 38, 39, 40. You know, at 19, 20, 21, the young man needs an ego. You know, he needs to know that he can feel confident to get out there and achieve and do what he wants to do and bring what contribution he can to the world and get the things he needs to do. He needs to acquire and all of that. I mean, that's probably my journey. It's certainly one I recognize. So when we started, so there's the difference there in a nutshell between the Mankind Project and A Band of Brothers. The Mankind Project is essentially dealing with adult men and their disillusionment, you know, all the things that went wrong and all the regrets and, you know, can I start again and that section. But that is repugnant in some ways to young men because they instinctively understand that they need to be finding confidence to get out there and, you know, fight the good fight. So that was the understanding that was the impetus for setting up A Band of Brothers. What these youngsters needed was just a little bit of guidance. You know, they had great energy, passion, you know, which was actually being channeled into negativity or crime or whatever it was. So we had to work out a way of, you know, helping them to use that anger, that channeling that craftiness that they had as well into something which was going to serve them rather than something which is going to be worked to their detriment. So yeah, there was a resistance in young men naturally to go inward too much, and I think that's probably a good thing. Yeah, in a way. But what the young men need to feel that the older men can see them. They need to be recognized and admired, really, in a sense. I remember Robert Bly used to say, if you're a young man and you're not being admired by an older man, you're being hurt by older men.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what he used to say. Yeah. So, and then another thing was about Jung said that the first half of life is a necessary mistake. So if you put all that together, you know, you've got to get out there and do your egotistic mistakes. Yeah.
I love that on so many levels, but mainly I think right now because it makes me just think about how so many people around the world, especially I think, you know, let's say people who are younger than 35 or so, there really is a sort of a great fear of making mistakes.
Yeah.
Great fear that lives, you know, in our hearts and I suppose in our brains that, you know, if we put something, you know, if we put one foot wrong, then there's this kind of immeasurable cost that will set us, of course, forever. And, you know, everything that you do in life needs to be directed at making sure that doesn't happen, you know, almost like there's an inner tiger mom.
Not a caution.
You with a ruler across the fingers as you keep on practicing those scales, you know, so it's scary, you know, because of course we learn when we make those mistakes.
Yes.
You know, and we find the inner metal inside to be able to rectify, pull it back. Okay, try again. You know, all right, let's look at this differently. That's where experience comes from. But yet we're so scared of making those mistakes.
Many of the youngsters that Band of Brothers works with have made considerable mistakes, and you know, some of them are about to go into prison or just come out. And we part of the work is, you know, not to label them as a mistake. And reframe, as you suggest, reframe all mistakes are potential learning experiences. You know, what did you learn from that? Okay, so would you do that again? No. Okay, good. So let's leave that in the rearview mirror and let's move forward. You know, mistakes are inevitable. I think the other thing I find with youngsters, young men particularly perhaps, is they feel a real pressure to find out what they're going to do with their life. You know, where am I? What track am I going to get on to become something? And it's almost as though you know, they visualize it like a railway track or something they've got to get on and just
destination
follow it, into the distance. Whereas in actual fact, it's more like a breadcrumb trail. You know, you just have to find the next breadcrumb and get to there and check it out and sniff around and see where you go from there. And that takes a lot of the pressure off and a bit of the tension out of it. And of course, a lot of confidence comes by doing. So we can, once we know what the breadcrumb is, we can get them and say, what did you find there? Okay, just do that. Do that one thing. You know, paint that one wall, change that one tire, and then see how you feel. How do you feel? Yeah, good. Okay, good. You feel good because you achieved something. Would you like to achieve something else? Yeah, okay, I like it. Let's go. So getting him onto that kind of breadcrumb track is part of the work there. Yeah.
Beautifully said. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to open up to John and Rana.
Yeah.
If you guys have little questions or comments or reflections you'd like to share. I'm sure you've been enjoying the conversation as much as I have. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Michael, thank you. I love it. I resonate with many aspects of it. It was more just kind of some kind of bubbles that effervesced as you were speaking. And do you feel like, if the younger generation has the older generation modeling the being in the heart, and yet also as the elders are modeling the being in the heart, they're supporting the evolution and this kind of embryonic development of the individual, and that they all need the confidence of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I feel like it's almost twofold by the elders holding that heart space, not only for ourselves, but also to much more compassionately hold this younger generation as they are dealing with just unprecedented pressure to do and to be. And I loved your analogy of the breadcrumb. I mean, at 54 and completely recreating my own life, it's almost like I purposefully drove my train off of the tracks.
Yeah.
And a lot of destruction, don't get me wrong, but it was a loss of so much of what I really didn't need and what wasn't serving me. And so I feel like that breadcrumb, that gem of a breadcrumb that you share is so valuable, because we can only be in this moment. And the only thing that we have the remotest control of is this moment and this breadcrumb. And so really, it's the idea of a track at any age is so limiting as to who we are as humans. And then my last comment, do you feel like this kind of patriarchal modeling that is so often present in many of our cultures, do you feel that is just the ripple effect of kind of the raise of the patriarchal mentality at the expense of a more feminine, kind of more maternal energy a couple thousand years ago, depending on...
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. The men's work works in circles. And of course, the circle is a more of a feminine shape. And the patriarchy is about, pyramids. It's about somebody at central control and way down. So I believe that the pyramids forming into circles is a good thing. It's a more natural thing. It's a place where everybody is equal. Whereas the patriarchy is about power over. The men's work and the circles seem to be more about power with. So we work on confirming each other's sovereignty. Each man, each woman is sovereign. We're sovereign beings. We make our own decisions, and we have our own values and purpose. And recognizing that in others helps me to understand it in myself. Yeah, just the one thing about the great thing about just backing up for a second on the breadcrumbs. If I can see a breadcrumb over there, just quite near, and I go to the breadcrumb, I can see things from there that I would never have seen if I hadn't have gone to the breadcrumb. Yeah. you're laughing because you know that's it works. Yeah, so
100%.
we've used that over and over with the youngsters, and they do get it. And yeah. So yeah, I think that patriarchal control, power over, is something which will hopefully be a thing of the past. So, although we do need pyramids, I think in terms of we need pyramids of experience and competency, so that we can teach. Yeah, that's important. But what we don't need is power for power's sake. And I would also say that the patriarchies came about eventually as initiation faded. So we could say that patriarchies are the heads of patriarchies are usually uninitiated men. Yeah. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
John, what's taking over for you?
I just love that. I didn't know what to expect when I came in here. And I was deliberately switched off from the video just to listen, because you got, such a great voice there, Michael. Yeah.
Thank you.
And it just resonates through. Yeah. It really does ripple through, that, what you're expressing and telling, you can almost feel that energy coming through.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. And I really loved it. That 95% of your thoughts, subconscious. Yeah.
I didn't invent that. That's the research. Yeah.
That really got me.
Terrifying. Yeah,
got my attention, and sort of that subconscious mind signals itself into the body.
Yeah.
I think that's that really, really, for me, I can totally link to that, and I can totally resonate with that. But I found that really, really super interesting. And
thank you.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to connect with you.
If you ever want to dip your toe into a bit of men's work, it'd be lovely to see you. Yeah.
No, I like that. What was the Band of Brothers? And
Band of Brothers is the charity that recruits the local men who really are there's a lot of good men out there who want to help. They really do. Almost as a vocation, I want to help the youngsters, but they don't know how to do it. So Band of Brothers offers them a training on how to behave. And they have a saying in the Band of Brothers that nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. How to connect and just be there as a mentor, really, for young men.
Yeah. I'm part of it, even though I'm based out of the Netherlands, where my mum lives, or did live in the UK. There's a youth zone right opposite, and it's in Dagenham, and they created a program made in Dagenham, and they were looking for role models for the youngsters of today. And they approached me for that, and I've been involved with that. And it's been, it's because I'm at distance, I can't do as much as what I'd like to do.
Sure.
But I find it so interesting when I go in there, look at the youngsters today, and where they're actually they're actively looking for some kind of guidance. They're actively looking for them people to show an interest in them. So I'm interested in sort of the men's movement. Was that
the Mankind Project? Funny enough, I just came back a couple of months ago. I was out in Holland. Because there is a Mankind Project group now in Holland.
Okay. Well, whereabouts in Holland?
You'd have to check it out. They're all over the place. It's scattered out, and they're doing work with men who want to go and work in prisons. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's worth checking out. There are a lot of good guys.
Yeah.
And they speak English better than we do.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. I'm 30 years here, and I'm still struggling with my Netherlands.
Yeah, I bet you are. It's a tough one.
Yeah. No, but that was great. No, really, that was really insightful, Michael, and I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Good to meet you. Yeah.
Yeah. Likewise.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your time. And I really hope to have you on again soon for a couple more conversations, because there's just so much to explore.
Yeah,
and
there's a lot
talk
more
about.
to dig into. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing, because because the subconscious, I should have said it at the time, because the subconscious mind is an accumulation of experiences, then the antidote cannot just be a mantra. It has to be an experience which is evolutionarily more powerful than the original shaming or whatever it was that went on. So that's what we do. We create experiences which are so positively powerful that they actually hit the subconscious mind, and then we give them a little practice sheet to go with.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great point. Well, yeah, thank you so much for sharing your journey, and I think you've given everyone a lot of food for thought, or rather food for the heart as well, and also some great tidbits on the kinds of pressures and things that modern leaders, are looking into as well, and where the leading edge of the work they need to do is as well. So, thank you again.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for doing what you do. Yeah, you're enlightening us all in many different ways. Yeah, appreciate you, man.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Mind. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious to take a look at our community, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Make sure you head to humblemind.co to check out more and to see what we're up to. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.